I would like to welcome those people who are joining us online. We've got a group here at St. Mark in Gleason Hall, and this is our second discussion, probably final discussion, unless you really want to get into statistics. Lies, dang lies, and statistics or statisticians. Last month, what we talked about was the question of things that we misremember, things we misquote, things that we misinterpret, things that come from the Bible that we need to go back to the Bible to see what it actually says. We had a little bit of fun with the question of, is it a movie quote or is it a line from the Bible? And there's a wonderful thing called Google. There's a wonderful thing, like way back when, how many of you grew up in, maybe going to Sunday school, where you would get a gold star if you turned to the Bible verse the quickest? I grew up with that.
I was Catholic, we didn't look at the Bible. We didn't? Not kidding.
We got a gold star just for attending.
We got condemned to purgatory.
Yeah, well, gold stars are a funny thing because we are saved by what alone? Grace. Through faith. So grace through faith, but dang it, I want that gold star. Right? And so back in the day, it was like, somebody turned to Ezekiel, so-and-so, and you'd have to, or if you wanted to find something in the Bible, you'd have to go to concordance, you'd have to go to something to actually find chapter and verse. Even when I was in seminary, there were not like the simple thing like the Bible app. You had to have a actual program where they would you could look up things in the original Greek, the original Hebrew, except things like Bible Works or something, which is still a clunky system, but it was better than anything I'd ever seen before that. Now, literally, you can just type something in and you can find it. And it amazes me how oftentimes we take things for granted. Something, and we've all experienced this on social media. Back before social media, there was an email that you would get from a favored aunt, or a favorite uncle, or a favorite distant relative. It would start off with forward, colon, slash, or whatever. It was always, some conspiracy theory. Now we don't have to forward those. We can just repost them or retweet them. And all it takes is simply to do like the very simple thing of, is this true? So that's the encouragement partly with the Bible, and this is one of the things, we were, I think, chapter 15 and 16 right now of Matthew's Gospel, so if you haven't started yet, encourage you to jump on board. If not, you can always pick it up at Mark, Luke, or John. One of the nice things when you read through the Bible, the Gospels, 2 chapters, 3 chapters a week with the Gospels, you get to start seeing what immediately precedes maybe a passage that is maybe not as well understood, or what comes immediately afterwards. Today in the St. Mark's Spark, it was the story of the Canaanite woman and her faith, and she's got a demon-possessed daughter, and she's talking about, Jesus calls her a dog, says it's not good to take the children of Israel's food, and give it to the dog, and she's like, but even the dogs eat the crumbs. And it's an incredible thing, and we kind of look at Jesus like, really? That's kind of harsh, but also it is mirroring the sentiment of the day, which is there are those on the inside and there are those who are on the outside. There are those who are clean and those who are unclean, and the whole thing comes in the context of that which defiles. So the stories are there. The stories are good enough on their own, but if we read a little bit beforehand, or if we read a little bit afterwards, or you'll start seeing a theme where you read something like, didn't I read something similar 3 chapters back? And so, and the fun part comes when you get into Mark's Gospel or Luke's Gospel, and you're like seeing just the subtle differences between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And not so subtle on Mark, because Mark, you're like, give me more. Give me more. And Mark's like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Now you're at the cross. So that's what we talked about last month. This month we are talking about the best way we could say if there's lies or mistruths, this is dang lies. These are dangerous things that we say that we're sure maybe is in the Bible, or we're sure that, because it sounds like it should. It feels holy, it feels good, but in fact, oftentimes it's toxic. And so I call those dang lies, because these are the ones that people are more likely to say. And especially for those who are outside a church community, or maybe those who are not as familiar with Scripture, will be completely turned off because of the person delivering a potentially hurtful message. So I'm gonna be bold. I've got some right here that we can talk about. What is a terrible Christian cliche?
God helps those who help themselves.
God helps those who help themselves. I'm not even sure if that's in
It's God's will.
Oh, we'll get there in a second. God's will.
Okay.
But let's talk for a second. God helps those who help themselves. We're kind of trusting the Holy Spirit a little bit on this, because where is that found in the Bible?
It isn't.
No, I have no idea who said it originally. It sounds like something Ben Franklin said.
Yeah.
So this is essentially, Israel is promised like the land of milk and honey, and so what do? We add Nesquik in the United States, and we add stuff that's not there. That's tied much more to the Protestant work ethic. Mm-hmm. It's tied much more to our sense, it's our collective sense of individuality that says basically don't expect a handout. One of the phrases that gets used, speaking of handouts, it's not a handout, it's a hand up. I one time used that in a intro to broadcast journalism class where I interviewed somebody from the food bank in Central Missouri, and she used that, and that was part of my story, and I got ripped. Because, could you say anything else? Because that is so cliche. That is used all the time about handouts and hand-ups. So God helps those who help themselves. The closest thing we could probably find to that is Paul talking about how workers are due their wages. Those who are working for the gospel are entitled to be supported by those in the community in which they work. And this is more or less talking about preachers, apostles, prophets, etc. But God helps those who help themselves. I can give you a lot of answers and a lot of examples of the Bible that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. It is not a bad thing to be self-reliant, but in fact, one of the biggest things and the biggest taglines about that is when you're saying, I can help myself, that means you don't need somebody else's help. Our faith is built on, our faith is entirely built on the whole idea that we cannot save ourselves. We are not gods of our own lives. So that goes into maybe from being potentially benign to actually being toxic, because it can eliminate the need for God. If you can just help yourself out of it, or distract yourself out of it. Any thoughts on God helps those who help themselves? Yeah.
It's also very prejudicial against people who need help, and it's like putting them down, saying you should be helping yourself.
Yep. And so those who can't hear online, prejudicial against those who actually need help. And the idea, that's another great point, because that actually comes from a place of privilege. To be able to say, I have the ability to do it. And everybody, it comes from being born on second base. Right?
Or third.
Or third. Or third. And so I prefer John, Paul, Ringo, and George, or Joe Cocker. What do you remember? What song they both sang? Love for my friends. Jesus calls us friends, right? So the fact of the matter is, much of what we experience in the Western world is actually antithetical to what the early church was. What we hear in the beginning of Acts, God's adding to the number every day, which is not happening in the church right now. But what happened before that? everybody's holding everything in common. Everybody's saying, Carl comes and says, I've got $100, and Bill comes and says, I've got 20, and John says, I've got 5. We'll put it all in the kit, and everybody will have enough, and nobody will have too many.
Oh gee, that's communism.
What did you say? I think I know what you said.
I once had a conversation. I've actually had this conversation more than once, but I think the statute of limitations, it was 2 decades ago. I was in my first call, and one person who then said, everybody's sane. So this, I will just let you know, when you come to a pastor and you say, everyone is sane, the pastor will say, well, I'll speak for myself and you can speak for yourself. And if everybody else wants to come and share the same concern, that's fine. So everybody's sane is a throwaway line. But the person said, well, everybody in Presbyterian women, they're all upset about this Bible study this year. And I was like, I'm 29 years old. I have no real connection with the Presbyterian women. I think I was just there. And I said, well, let me look at it. And so then I was like, well, this is just quoted the Bible here, so what's the issue? And she's like, well, Jesus sounds like a socialist. and I'm like, okay. And she's like, and I don't like that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. We can have our opinions on this one way or the other, but if that's how you read it correctly, then because a lot of things we do to try to be like, well, it's capitalism. You know, Jesus was a favor of. Well, there really wasn't capitalism there, but so you can't take a more modern thing and put it back there. But Jesus was actually presenting a different system altogether, and so it's been tried at various points. Sometimes within the church, sometimes on the outside. One of the more famous ones in the 20th century was in a little place called Americus, Georgia. Anybody ever been to Americus, Georgia? It's right down the road from Plains, where Jimmy Carter lives. And it was Millard Ford. And we've talked about this before, the Cotton Patch Gospel. And they had Koinonia, and it was a what do you call it? What do you call it when you get a group of people together?
A commune.
A commune. And so this is why language is always incomplete, because one can see this and not be like, and not be hopefully lumped in with Stalin, or to be lumped in with, what's all the other atrocities over this. Language is limited with that. God helps those who help themselves. And in fact, anything that focuses on the individual is actually mostly contrary to the God who is revealed in Scripture. Because we believe in a covenantal love. We believe in covenantal promises. Going back to Noah, we got the rainbow. Going back to Abraham, I'm going to make you a father of many nations, and all nations will be blessed through you. Going back to King David, even if it is a covenant with one person, it is a covenant that benefits all, either the nation of Israel or the whole world. Even as the new covenant is that as well. And so the idea of the collective, which is very, very strong in Scripture, is something that is not lifted up as much in America or in the West. Somebody else had one. Yes.
God doesn't give us more than we can handle.
God doesn't give you more than you can handle. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Shall we open today's reading from Job?
Yeah.
Chapter 1. All the way through. Just read chapter 1 and chapter 2. Everything's going well for Job, right? And it's interesting because so many times we will look at the Bible and we will have a question of how are we supposed to act? How are we supposed to react? We're going to talk about this in the Sunday school class. Is the Old Testament, is it spiritually relevant? Is it practically relevant? And it's interesting, some people can very easily identify something as a story. Very clearly, Job did not. It'd be terrifying, frankly, to think that God and the devil are making bargains, right? It's like Faust, and you're making this bargain that says, well, look how upright my servant Job is. And the devil's like, take everything away and see what happens. And God's like, you got it.
Trading Places, the movie.
It's trading places, yeah. Looking good, Billy Ray.
Kind
Feeling
of
good.
a bet, isn't it?
It
my,
is.
My guy is better than your guy.
Yeah. It's like in fact, I never thought of this, but it's interesting to juxtapose that with Elijah on Mount Carmel, and when Elijah is going against the 400 false prophets of Baal. It's kind of like that on the inverse. It's saying, this is the one real God, not the God you worship. And God's over here going, this is my one true servant. And then everything happens, house collapses, kids die. His wife has one of my favorite quotes in all of Scripture. She says, curse God. Why don't you just curse God and die? And it's just, kind of thing. But Job is given more than anybody can reasonably handle. So much more. And we will, maybe I'll conclude with this at the end. But one thing, before I dig into his three friends, do you know what the three friends do when they first arrive with him?
You sit down with them.
Sit down in silence for a week. And then they lay into him. But a week of silence with somebody who's grieving is more than nearly anyone will do. Because we don't know what to say, so we're going to throw off. God's not going to give you anything more than you can handle. Look at Jesus. What is Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane? Lord, if it is your will, take this burden from me. But at last, not my will, but your will be done. What is Jesus crying out from the cross? He is, my Eloi, Eloi, I have to go back and also butcher it, but my God, why are you forsaken me? Jesus gives us the license to even say, I am so broken. It wasn't as if Jesus said to the criminal next to him, he didn't say, hey, can you step up a little. or to quote Monty Python, always look on the bright side of life. Right?
Yeah.
Because when you look at these things, and it's funny because you can look at Monty Python and you're like, that's actually kind of prophetic. In its own way, the way it's using humor of saying, this is so ridiculous, so why do we do it? One that's kind of similar to that is every time God closes the door,
The other one opens.
Scoff. Because that's also a place of privilege. Right?
The thing I don't like about that saying is it's presupposing that God is doing these things to you.
Yeah.
And not just bad luck, or you did it, maybe you made some wrong decisions, or your neighbor did something. You know what I'm saying? It's like, God did it. Well, no.
Every effect has to have a cause. I mean, because this is for, at times in my own life, but I think a default where it goes, who's to blame? There's got to be someone to blame. This is one of the hard things about when the tornado happened in Java. Who do you blame? No, you can blame climate change because that's part of it. Because it happens when the water gets warmer in the Gulf. It's strong. Katrina, same thing. It lingers, and then you have the air that's coming down from Canada, the Arctic blast, and those things meet in Kansas or Oklahoma. Well, that's going to happen no matter. That's just going to happen no matter what. But the sheer size of it, perhaps you could do that.
So what do the insurance companies say?
They call them act of
Acts
God.
of God.
Acts of God. And,
Blame God.
well, what they're trying to say, this is out of our hands.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's interesting
God,
that
payoff.
but the description, nobody ever says it's an act of God. I mean, I might say it's an act of God when somebody answers the phone call. When answers the phone, when you call the insurance company. That's what I'm experiencing right now, neither here nor there, church related, as we talked about earlier, before we went live. But you call something an act of God, and God's like, why are you blaming me?
Because we don't want to take the blame.
Because we don't want to take the blame. But you want to have, you want to be able to say, it was this choice, because, you know, you want a scapegoat, going back to Old Testament times. You want someone or something to say, oh, it was that person's fault.
We want to avoid doing it again.
Yep. But we're prone to, aren't we? We want to avoid doing it again, and yet if the same systems and structures that led that first scapegoat to do it, will have it come again. But no, all good points. There's a movie called Saved. It came out about 20 years ago. It's a teenage comedy. It's lampooning early 2000s evangelical youth groups. It's rather specific, or Christian schools. And it's got people you'd recognize, and it's got Mandy Moore. It's got some other people, but I won't go into the whole thing. It is a very good movie. Somebody said to her, every time God closes the door, he opens a window, and she says, so you can have something to jump out. and what's interesting about that movie, we had just taken our youth group on a winter retreat. And one of the nice things in California we don't have here is that when you go to winter retreats in California, you do it in the mountains, and so you get to go skiing. And so, but we did it on our own. We watched the movie, we talked about it. I talked to the friend at my basketball who was at a much more evangelical church, and he brought it up watching the movie, and he goes, have you heard of it? I'm like, yeah, I just watched it with my youth group kids. He goes, you showed it to your kids. 40 years for that whole generation. Let me turn that up. There are times, how long, like, when you think about the exile in Babylon, that's definitely a closed door. Whole generations died before they got to come back. Some never did. So, so we have to be very, very careful with that. It's not simply, I lost my job at this high-paying job, and then a week later, I got a job making 20% more. You know, it's much more about success. Other thoughts on that, or another Christian cliche we need to avoid?
What about Christian, or the trite but true? You know, I'm thinking of the Lord works in mysterious ways. Which
Yeah.
is another kind of like, don't bother me about this because it's a mystery.
Isn't that in John?
It is.
Yeah, well, it's
So that is a biblical.
it's also U2. Also,
Is it?
U2 sings it. It's,
Oh, you're just.
but she moves in mysterious ways. But yeah, it's also sometimes it can be the right thing at the wrong time. Because if you're saying the Lord moves in mysterious ways, sometimes that might be a comfort. But if it's also potentially, again, gets back to we're putting this on God. You know, and I've shared this before, when the earthquake happened in Haiti, and you had Pat Robertson on the 700 Club announcing this was punishment for something that happened 200 years ago. And then a year, 2 years later, the tornado happens in Joplin and it's crickets. Although there were people who were trying to do that too, is because America allows all kinds of deviant behavior. This is okay, you know, but it's this whole idea, or maybe the world's broken. I mean, the world is literally broken, right? When we're talking about this, you know, we can look at it from a distance, and maybe that's sometimes what you have to do when things are really hard. You know, you might be zoomed in on something, but if you can zoom out, and you can start seeing, maybe get perspective, but also be able to see some beauty that's there as well. But if you zoom in on the Earth's crust, it's literally broken. Think about the tidal wave in Japan. Think about tsunamis. I mean, this is all happening. I mean, earthquakes. You know what state has the most earthquakes? And I might get fact checked online. It's people like Googling it. Oklahoma.
Oh, because of fracking.
It's all fracking.
They also have the most tornadoes.
Yeah. Oklahoma is America's Australia. You know, it's
That's
like,
why they sent the Cherokee there, probably.
But it's the fracking that's there. Like I remember,
Now they got
not my finest hour, because you know, we overload the clothes washer,
Yeah.
And it moves all over.
and that had been happening. I had to replace like a spring. The spring cost like $60, you know, whatever it was, but we got it fixed. I'm listening. I'm in our house in North Joplin, and I hear, and I'm like, Sarah. She's like, it's not even on. And it was tornado, or it was earthquakes.
Mm.
Earthquakes because, and it was completely because you are pushing water down subterranean, and it's causing all kinds of issues.
Not just water.
Not just water, yeah. It's a messy thing. Other things. I'm gonna give you maybe the most dangerous one. Heaven needed another angel.
Oh.
Have you heard? that
Yeah, I've
used?
heard it.
Yep.
Or God needed him more than you, or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, we drove by the Precious Moments
Okay,
billboards.
that place is creepy.
Oh,
when you live in Joplin, Precious Moments is a Carthage, the county seats, Carthage of Jasper County. Oh God help us. Because when you have young kids, you're like, what are we gonna do?
it's like the dead children.
Well, they've got. Have you seen that thing? It's like in the back room of that. They've got this whole thing, Two Dead Children, and it's like it's meant to be caring, and it's meant to allow people, and people will grieve in different ways. And so I don't want to discount that. It gives me the heebie-jeebies with that, and but when you have young kids, you're like, I gotta kill 2 hours. I gotta do something. So we're out there. We're going to the mining museum again.
There's some good Civil War battlefields down there.
Yeah, the Battle of Carthage,
Yeah.
which has
There's a lot of dead people there.
If you want to know what's like everything there is to do in the 4 states, I'm your person. We went down to West Island Springs, Oklahoma. You know what took place in West Island Springs, Oklahoma? Anybody?
There was a battle.
There might have been. This was where the red fern grows.
Oh,
It's where that took place, and also where they filmed the movie. So we went to West Island Springs, Oklahoma.
I've been there. I didn't know it, but
Yep.
I've been to Siloam Springs and
Yeah,
West.
that's where the college, John
Brown.
There's
Is
some
there.
Cherokee artist that's from there too.
Yeah.
John Brown.
And so the danger with this, first of all, God's got enough angels. God's got enough angels. I think we get confused. My favorite movie of all time is It's a Wonderful Life. And that's a polarizing statement because some people, my brother Brad absolutely hates the movie.
It's okay.
I adore it. But we see Clarence and we think, oh, every time
When a bell rings.
Rings and angel
Angel
gets
gets
his
his
wings.
that's right, Susan. You know, it's
Nobody
like-
died in that one.
Nobody died in it.
I mean,
There were-
that's not why the.
that's not true. Because in the middle thing right there, you had the death of the kid Gower, Mr. Gower poisoned.
That's
You had
right.
his brother die.
But that's not why the bell rang and made the angel.
No. The bell ring because he was angel first class. You had to rise up to your wings.
Right.
It's nonsense. What's also nonsense is the way we view angels as if they look like precious moments cherubs, but you know, children with oversized heads.
Vacant eyes.
And vacant eyes just stare into your soul. And this is such a dangerous concept of how we even look at angels. What's the first thing an angel says when there is a divine appearance?
Fear not.
Fear not. Be not afraid. Because they're scary. You know, something shows up from like Ann Geddes or one of those chubby angels that are like doing this. You want to, oh, come here. You know, it's like the Archangel Michael. You know, this is not.
It's not me, you got the wrong person.
I mean, these are terrifying beings at first. So what's more is that the question about there are angels which have their role to play, and there are human beings, and those are two very, very different things. What's also about that, it's saying you should not be sad. You should not be grieving. Isn't your faith strong enough? That's where you're coming in like the friends of Job, when they do start talking. Think of all the blessings you have. Think of all these things, and it's like just be quiet. Just sit and weep with those who are weeping. Just feel their pain in that. You know, one of the best illustrations of somebody who does not know how to keep their mouth shut is Hannah's husband in the story of Samuel. Hannah is married to Elkanah, I think, and Hannah is married to Elkanah. Elkanah has more than one wife. Again, biblical definition of marriage is a little fluid. There's more than one wife. The second wife has all these kids. They would have kids. Hannah's not. And Hannah is upset about this. Elkanah loves her more than anything. And do you know what Elkanah says to her? Why are you so sad? Aren't I more than 10 sons to you? And I read that one way, maybe growing up. I read it an entirely different way now. And I'm like, Elkanah, you're an idiot. Because that's not the right thing to say. The right thing to someone you love. I'm sure, obviously she loves you, but there's something more that's missing. And so I think especially when it comes to grieving a child that is lost, the best thing we can do is just be there and be silent. You know, and allow people to feel the pain. Because the other thing about grief is if we're not honest with grief, grief is always honest with us. And it will, grief is like, what, the Dutch boy, you know, at the dike. It's gonna come out. And if we don't deal with it honestly, and if we don't deal with it faithfully, then it's like matched to tinder. That kindling, it's gonna just blow up. So very dangerous.
Did you say on Sunday, I think in Sunday school class, that the Psalms are more than half lament? What, didn't you say something like that?
Yeah, considerably over half are Psalms of suffering, Psalms of lament. Even the ones that are uplifting. I was reading with my mom on Monday, Psalm 139. I will praise you for I am fearful and wonderfully made, and you formed my inward beings. You know, your fingerprints are all over me. It's a beautiful song. And then right at the very end, it's like, and smite my enemies.
By the way.
Yeah, by the way. And it's like even the Psalms, like you can go like Psalm 23, Psalm 121, others, and be like, okay, that's a psalm of rejoicing, psalm of protection. And even some of the ones that might fall into that category, then will have potentially dark turns that are there. But it's, if I said it on Sunday, I meant to, but I'll repeat it now, is we are given a gift in our faith tradition called lament. We are allowed to cry out to God. we are allowed to look out and say, I am completely and utterly destroyed. And God does not write us off. God did not write, I mean, literally, my God, why are you forsaken me? You know, Jesus didn't come with that. That's just the Old Testament. That's from the Psalms. It's saying, my God, why are you forsaken me? We don't want to make that our only conversation with God, but there are times when we're so broken. How many of you have ever seen the movie The Apostle?
Oh, that's a great.
Yeah. Go see it, or go rent it, or find it on a streaming service. It's Robert Duvall.
That's a fabulous.
What's that?
That's a fabulous movie.
Oh, it's
I
unbelievable.
think didn't he win an Academy Award for
I
that?
think he did.
That is a great.
And
Farrah
his name-
Fawcett's in it too.
She is.
Oh.
And a young, Walter Goggins.
I don't know.
Oh.
Find out.
Does anybody know Walter Goggins? Such a great actor. But a young Walter Goggins in that as well, but Walton Goggins maybe. But it's about a Pentecostal preacher, loses his church, loses his family, loses his wife,
Job, in other
hit
words.
somebody with a
Well,
baseball bat.
No, he did it to himself. Oh, okay.
Well, but he was a philanderer. He was all these different things. He was absent, and then it's almost about his rebirth. And I mean, it's just a lovely, lovely movie, and hard because there's a scene where he's upstairs and he's just arguing with God. Haven't I always been your servant? He's talking to the third person. Hasn't Sonny always done this for you? Hasn't Sonny always answered when you call? And the neighbors are calling, complaining, and his mom answers and says, sometimes Sonny talks to God and sometimes Sonny yells at him. And it was, you know what it was is, well, it's not my tradition. It's the one that partially I was raised in, the Pentecostal. It's not the way that I best experience the divine, but it wasn't a pandering movie. It was actually very well done about that. It wasn't just people jumping around with snakes and stuff. So the Apostle. On the other side, just a quick sidebar, because I was thinking about that yesterday or today about movie I want to watch with Sam. How many of you saw Leap of Faith with Steve Martin? It's about a tent revival. I'm giving you all gems here.
I know, we need to be writing this down. is
So
what I'm
it's
thinking.
Steve
Okay.
Martin, it's Deborah Winger. Meatloaf is the bus driver,
Oh, my.
and as he's driving in Paradise of the Dead, the lights playing, it's like, oh, this is so good. And it's about Liam Neeson is the town sheriff. I mean, it's a pretty power-packed thing. And it's in Kansas, so Lauren. Of course. Yeah, you know. And it's a town that is praying for rain. Yeah. And the tent revival comes by. That's why everything goes on there. But as with anything else, you know, if there's a movie that's about the thing you've studied your whole life, you'll find flaws in it because you're like, people don't do this, people don't do that. You know, Pentecostal revival will not have actually Jesus on the cross. You know, that's Roman
Catholic.
Maybe Episcopalian, but they're not having revivals. But this is so the Apostle Leap of Faith. But again, we are given license to be real with God, and God help us if we're not actually real with God. Because how can we ever help to be? It's like going to your auto mechanic and saying everything sounds good when you know there's a knock. It's like going to your doctor and your doctor's like, how are you feeling? And you're like, good. You know, it's like you go there to be healed, but you gotta share where your brokenness is. Yeah.
I have a very, very dear friend. She's been one of my two best friends since college. And out of the blue, several years after we were both married, I got a text from her. Actually, she wrote me a letter because this was before text. She said, I just wanted you to know that my husband has died. He died 3 months ago, but I've just been able to get around to writing it, letting everybody know. And my first thought was, how do I respond to this? I immediately picked up the phone and I said, Donna, tell me what happened. And she talked and talked and talked and told me what happened. And she said, you know what? So far, you're the only person that's answered me. And I thought, well, thank God for that. And then, and she was calling me from the hospital. And she said, well, the reason I'm in the hospital now is because right after he died, I started throwing up and was sick, and they put me in the hospital twice to find out what was wrong. She said, what was wrong is I'm pregnant.
Oh my.
And I said, okay. And that was the first episode. That was when her husband died. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the second. The first episode was when her brother was killed in a car crash while we were still in college. And she called me and she said, will you go to the funeral? And you said, and I said, absolutely. And we sat and held hands through the whole funeral for her brother. And the second one was her husband a few years later. And her remark was, it's actually easier the second time.
Well, experiences vary, you know, and I think about when you have compounded loss, especially if it's close by. One of the truisms that I don't know that I will ever be disproven, at least in my mind and my heart, is that all loss compounds. You never ever get over a loss. And so if there's an additional loss down the road, we might have better coping skills with it. We might have kind of a different perspective, but it's also, you know, there's a loss that you had 20 years ago and you have a loss today. That loss 20 years ago is part of the loss you're going to have today. And this is ultimately that's why I love Lent. I love that last Wednesday we get marked with ashes and told that we are dust, that we're going to die. It's honest. But that Lent does not end because we do not, as followers of Christ, believe in anything ever ending. We believe in things with God, they conclude, they find a fulfillment. Because when people say the end is near, repent, you know, they're wearing the sandwich boards. I assume their heart's in the right place. A lot of times it's not. Because, frankly, divine vengeance being preached out to somebody else or being yelled at somebody else can be kind of a savory dish. Because they're going to get theirs. And I've got a sandwich board, so I'm good. And, but I think the fact that our season concludes in resurrection, the hope of resurrection. That's what Paul says. Is, I want to know the power of the cross. I want to know the power of Christ's death, so that hopefully I can know the power of his resurrection. And so ultimately, this is what we are going to, and it's the inverse. It's the inverse of the way the world goes. You're born, and then you die. That's the conclusion. This is a reminder of your death, and we're moving towards the hope of resurrection. So a few others. We've got a few of these. God needed an angel. Ooh, not good. God has closed the window, but closed the door, but opened a window. You're 2 for 2. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's a Kelly Clarkson song, right? I think it's Kelly Clarkson.
It's Nietzsche.
What's that?
It's Nietzsche.
Nietzsche.
Yeah, it is.
Well, yeah. So it's
It's not very far from the gospel.
it's not biblical. It's not biblical. In fact,
It's Conan, too.
it's Conan.
Conan.
Did you-
Conan. The war.
Yeah.
The
Nabal.
Yeah.
Neighbor.
Nabal.
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 Yeah, yes. Conan the Barbarian. God never gives us more than we can handle. I think we covered that.
Yeah,
we
we
did.
Yeah.
Everything happens for a reason.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, careful, 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 careful. Because when you're saying everything happens for a reason, sometimes I will say I believe in a God who has a plan. I experience God and actually hear the Lord's name far more on the golf course than other places. And you
And
know
not-
why you hear God's
Not
name.
necessarily in the
It's
right
not.
way.
It's not a plus.
Not a compliment.
It's also. I remind people that Jesus, in fact, did not have a middle name. But people, the reason I'll say, so I remember my mom saying this, and she was quoting her dad, and we're talking about God's plan. And her father said there's God's plan, and then there's God's perfect plan. And the reason I bring up golf is the best way I can describe it. It's the perfect plan is you're always in the short grass. The perfect plan is you're on the fairway. The perfect plan is that you are chipping in onto the green, with the opportunity to shoot the birdie. Very rarely am I in the short grass. I like to do this and see where my ball goes. And generally, it's over here or it's over here, or just killing some worms along the way. So God's perfect plan is one thing. A lot of times, what God's plan is, and sometimes it's circumstances, sometimes it's our own poor decisions, and sometimes the poor decisions and choices of others. It's then, okay, now I'm here. How do I get up and down? How do I get to where I need to go? But yeah, the question, and we do believe that God has a plan, but also it's called hyper-Calvinism. It does not mean they've had a lot of coffee. It just means like extra, if you're extra Calvinist, that God is much more of Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. You remember Charlie McCarthy?
Edgar Bergen.
Edgar Bergen. I just listened to a podcast on him. I know. I'm really cool. About actually a dummy, like this idea that God controls everything, like a minuet, and that's a real dangerous thing. And it's easy to do when everything is going well, and you'd be like, well, clearly God's blessing me because I'm doing everything right, but things will go wrong, and when they do, how do we see it?
I think a lot of these sayings come from the book of First Rationalizations.
First rationalizations. I like it. So here's a few as we kind of wrap up, because we've got how many more minutes? I can't check my phone.
What do we go to, 7 or?
7.
5
You got 6 minutes.
6 minutes. We can do this. Where God guides, God provides. It's true for Abraham, I guess. But the question is, what's providing me? I mean, wealth? I mean, finances?
Or is that like
Status?
going through the manna and that
Yeah.
God guides and you follow that cloud or the pillar of fire and
Yeah.
then, I don't know.
But even the Israelites, were they thrilled with manna? They were not.
No.
You know what manna translates to? What is it? It literally means, what is it? And you're having, exactly, it's like, it's
Mystery meat.
It's mystery meat.
Yeah.
It's at Princeton Seminary where you're like, you had beef and noodles and it was beef stroganoff and it was beef a la, it's like, it's the same thing. If God brings you it, if God brings you to it, God will bring you through it.
Not true.
Not true.
I can't walk.
And as my mom would instill in us, because she was a speech pathologist, so she was teaching teachers who would go into special ed and special education and stuff. And mom always said, from the get-go, she instilled in this from before I could speak, that strengths and weaknesses, right? You know, there are things that some will have in spades, and some they'll have, other people will have other things in spades. Speaking of Joplin, the tornado, his father's passed away last week, or I think last week, a fellow named Don Miller. Don Miller was and Don and Patty just gems. They're both passed. Don had the same haircut since 1955. You know, the short flat top and stuff. And Don was so wonderful, and Patty was too. And their son Trip died in a tornado, and Trip was 49, so he's my age now. But Trip had Down syndrome, and you can say that's a disability. Of course it is, but it's a disability. But Trip was loving, more than I could ever. Trip was enthusiastic, more than I could be. Trip was, in so many ways, was the heartbeat of that church. And so, I think we have this idea that it has to be a blessing is one size fits all. And there are other things that, depending on, that mom always instilled, of saying, if your life is gonna look like this, because I've got plenty of brokenness in my life. Some that's obvious, some that's not. And so, you have to be careful with that. The greatest distance in the universe is the 18 inches between your head and your heart. So what's dangerous here is that we're trying to separate the two. Because there are the idea of, I had one of my good friend's moms from Springfield before I went to Princeton. She pulled me aside and she's like, don't let them take away your faith. Don't let them destroy your faith. And in fact, they did. But they helped me rebuild it. Because if my faith was that the world was 6,000 years old, then my faith, I could not have survived it. But that was not my faith. My faith was, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created. You can't outgive God. Well, that might be our stewardship theme. You can't
We'll sort that out.
We'll see that. We are saved by faith alone, but not by a faith that is alone. Well, when God closes the door, opens the window, we got that again. Man meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Well, that's
it's
almost like,
biblical.
it's like Joseph.
It
isn't
is, it is, absolutely, Joseph. And this is, I think, kind of something that John said earlier, where you can take the scripture and you can misuse it.
Out of context.
Because I love the idea of, you intended for me to hit it into the rough. But God helped me get it on the green too. Right? So there are absolute times where I think that's accurate. And I've got to lean on that very thing. However, theology changed in 1945. And the reason I say this is because the world became aware of the Holocaust. And whether it's apartheid, whether it's stuff going on in Palestine, you know, and just the sheer amount of stuff that's going on. Thank you, Mark. But be very careful to do that, because some people have done that with Elie Wiesel, with Knights. Anybody ever read Knights?
Yeah.
It's hard. Because he looks at I think it's a child that's hanging in the gallows. And someone says to him, where is God? And I'm probably not doing our best job quoting it or relaying it. He points to the child who has been hung by the Nazis and says, there is God. And there are Christians, and Elie Wiesel was not a Christian, he was very, very much a Jew. There are Christians that will say, like, well, that was the sacrificial image. of Jesus. It's like, no, that's a dead child. And so it's very difficult to have a Candide, Dr. Pangloss view from Voltaire, view of this is the best of all possible worlds. This is the whole thing. The 20th century was the century that there's supposed to be no more war, right? It was supposed to be we're all gonna buy the world a Coke, right? And it was not, and has not. We'll say the last two. A Bible that's falling apart usually belongs to someone who isn't.
I heard that one.
A Bible that is falling apart
I never heard that.
usually belongs to someone who isn't. Now, there is certainly truth that we can have comfort in the Bible, and we need to go to the Bible. And you know me well enough, I'm like, come read with me. Come read with me. Come read with me. There's good stuff that's there, but sometimes, very clearly, that is to say that if you get all the gold stars, if you attend Sunday school every Sunday, if you get all your verses memorized. And I used to kind of think, well, I'm living the right way, and then it's like, and the world goes, and partly it's me going, hey, there's a cliff, what are you just gonna do? But that's dangerous. Last one we're gonna finish with is, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. This is the we talked about John Brown University, and there's another one in South Carolina. There's another Christian school in South Carolina, Bob Jones University, and they would Greenville. Yep, beautiful place. And they would have the bumper stickers. God said it, or the Bible, or God said it. I believe it. That settles it. This is like saying the Constitution says it, I believe it, that settles it. Well, there are some questions about the Constitution. There are questions about, here's your document, but what does it actually mean? And we all pick and choose from the Bible those things from which we choose to emphasize and de-emphasize. What's also there is, I would hate to have that static of a thing. I would hate to have that static, because you've heard me share this before. One of my favorite parables is the parable of the oak tree and the willow. Have you heard me say this? You all forget, that's okay. Lauren's a little, I know this story. Because the oak tree's standing strong. And then looking up down at the willow, and the willow's over here going, and the oak tree's like, if you stood for something, if you had deep roots like I did, if you had a strong trunk, if you grew up as tall as I did, you sway to every single breeze. I stand strong. And the willows just. Well, time came that straight line winds, tornado, whatever storm happened. Night ends, day arrives. The oak has been uprooted, and the willow is going back and forth. I would much rather be a willow in my faith. I think oaks are very easy until there's severe weather, severe storms. Yeah.
And there's one more, and I think we heard Brian McLaren say this. Another survival thing, if you take that, and trees in Florida to survive the hurricane, it's not that just they're flexible, they drop their branches. And so sometimes you let go of things that are dragging you down and then are hurting you.
Yep.
It was what his illustration was about being that survivor.
Yeah. Yep. And which again, what's our core belief? What is the St. Mark is a credo, which is seek, discover, share. We're trying to whittle it down. Like, what is the essentials of why we're here in 3 words? I hope that I hope that I can have the same answer. A woman in Detroit Michigan, I think it was Detroit, where she was going in for surgery. I think it was to save her life. And right before they were going to put the mask on to anesthetize her, she asked the doctor, she said, "What is the chief end of man?" And he said, "Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy God."
Oh, wow.
And she said, "You may proceed." That's what I want to have the core. Saying if our chief goal, it's more inclusive the way we do it. Our chief goal, our chief end is to glorify God and enjoy God forever. And if we look at the nature of God as a God of love, a God who creates us, a God who has saved us, a God who has shown us a better path, a God who encourages us, a God who is near us and with us. If that's how we view God, it's amazing. I preached this several weeks ago or months ago. I don't know. If your God's angry, you're angry. If your God's anxious, you're anxious. The way you view the divine. Now, if your God is welcoming, if your God is inclusive, if your God is forgiving, if your God does require things of you, but God does this because God loves you like a divine parent. What's more, that's what Scripture says. It's not us making it up. So, I told you I'd finish up with the 3 friends of Job.
Mhm.
Be the 3 friends for the first week, not the friends afterwards. Job's friends were like fish, right? After 3 days,
Start to smell.
and then you get thrown out. So be that. So thank you all for joining us online. Unfortunately, I can't always see the who's doing what, so I will do my best in the comment section if there is any questions. But glad to have you all with us, and may God be with you.